Great. Hi, everybody. Wow, we actually have a little bit of a nice crowd still left today in the middle of the session. Thank you for staying for us. I'm excited to be joined by Traci and Adrian and Kat for this discussion on corporate travel. Wow, sorry. I thought I had everything else set.
You got
All of a
everything
sudden, I'm
okay
like,
over there?
yeah, everything's falling
Doing a
apart.
little
Wow.
wiggle?
I got so excited to be on stage that I'm just, coming apart here at the seams. Screw it, I'll just put it on the side here. Okay. So I'm excited to be joined by these experts in the field. And so why don't we start something easy and go introduce yourselves and where you're from, and we'll kind of take it from there.
I love the softball entry there. So, hi everybody, good morning. I'm Kat Titterington. I head up corporate travel strategy at IHG, based in Atlanta, although as you can probably tell from the accent, not originally from there, but I've been here for about 10, 12 years now, US based.
Great,
Good to be here.
Thanks. Adrian?
Hello everyone, I'm Adrian Emmanuel with SAP Concur. I manage our global car rental mobility partners, hotel suppliers, and OTAs, and I'm responsible for bringing content into our tool and distribution.
Great, thanks.
And I'm Traci Mercer. I am with Sabre. I have been in the space, so see a lot of familiar yet older faces in the audience. It happens to the best of us. And I oversee what Sabre likes to call non-air, which is also known as hotel partners, airline partners, rail, cruise, anything that's related to that within the Sabre ecosystem.
Great. Well, so excited to have you all join me. Okay, so now we're going to take it a little bit harder. Next question, I think, is a little bit more challenging. Obviously we're here for corporate travel ourselves to some extent, and I know that, whenever I talk to family members and friends, they're like, oh, you get to go to all these great places and see these amazing things, and frankly, a lot of times I don't, right? I mean, and I'm sure a lot of you are in the same case where you fly in, you end up getting out from the airport, you go to a hotel, sit in a meeting room, and next thing you know, you're back on a plane again. So what I wanted to ask the team here is like, okay, what place have you gone that you've, you kind of had that experience where it was such an amazing place and you didn't even get a chance to see it? So from my perspective, I actually went to visit my friends in Reykjavik and many years ago in India, and it was literally an 18-hour trip. It wasn't like to India and back, so coming out of the States, but it was kind of a stopover on a tour, and I did not get to see the city at all. They were nice enough to drive me to some of the beautiful places along the way, but that was one of those places that I would really love to go and see again. So, Traci, you have
lots of places. Yeah, I think definitely there's an association that all the travel we do is really sexy. I try to keep that going by finding at least one interesting thing to post on my social media feed so that people will get jealous. Doesn't usually work when you're locked in a windowless conference room all day. But I think probably most recently I've been in Turkey and Italy, and I didn't get any time to do anything really fun and social in those locations. So not cities, but entire countries that I'd love to spend more time in.
So we were laughing about this at breakfast. I was going to spin it a little bit and share, I travel all over the world, but what I'm loving these days is traveling domestically in the US and visiting with all the suppliers and partners, and actually trying to schedule a little time where we can go out and actually see something other than the corporate headquarters. Right, like when I go into Dallas, there's this barbecue place called Meet You Anywhere.
Oh, I love that place.
Oh my God, it's the best. It's the best.
The Big Baker, get that. Yes. So good with brisket.
Oh God. And so I've been trying to break that. Fly in, have your meeting, fly out, and actually schedule a team bonding moment with my suppliers and partners, and go experience some of the local places that are there that I would just never see, because you fly in and you're in a corporate office.
Exactly.
And fly out. But
great.
Yeah. So when I fly long haul, I try to spend a day or two. It doesn't always work. So I was just in Dublin and didn't really get much time to experience it.
Didn't go to the Guinness factory?
At least you must have had to get it someplace on the.
So I flew into Dublin, and then I went into the countryside for a conference, and then coming back, I tied in that one day that I mentioned, and I went to the Guinness factory.
Good.
I had to get my
Clients,
Guinness.
Right?
Yeah.
So you can justify that.
And Kat, anything from your side?
So I was thinking about this, and I feel very lucky. Most of the places that I've been to, I've had the opportunity to explore the city over one or more trips. But that's kind of where my travel has stopped, right? So maybe you can add a day, or you can stay a night, or whatever the piece is that you can add to your trip without it suddenly being a vacation when you're supposed to be working. But I've sort of, there's a number of countries I've been to where I've experienced the city, but I've never gone anywhere outside. So I was thinking about this, and even domestically in the US, I don't know how many times I've been to Denver, but I've not really been sort of out into Colorado, right? And, I'd come to California and I'd go to San Diego, LA, San Francisco, but have I ever really explored California? No, so it's that sort of added bits, but not really kind of stretched out from there.
Yeah, excellent, great. So we're through the warm-ups. So now we actually got to start,
Serious question.
using our brains and getting to where we are, and I'm sure hopefully our crowd will get some insights out of where we're going. So let's start with the kind of where we are in terms of where do you see corporate travel this year, and in terms of do we see it growing? I mean, Matt from Cleveland Research went through the things yesterday and talked about how we're seeing potential increase in demand and going places, and GBTA polls basically said I think there were 3/4 of travel managers see that the number of business trips will be going higher. Travel suppliers will see. Kat, from your perspective, and is that something that you're accurate? Think will happen? Certainly there have been recently layoffs on the tech side, right? So potential for cost-cutting measures and everything else. I mean, is the kind of the optimistic view from before kind of meet up with that reality today?
Yeah. So I would say for any of you who are in the Cleveland Research presentation, there's a lot that sort of rang true from where I was sort of sitting in the audience listening. And I think if you look at companies like organizations like GBTA and various others who are sort of polling our customer organizations as well as the companies within the hospitality space, it really has held true over 2022. So from a rather miserable kind of Q1, we sort of saw improvements all the way through Q2, 2022. And when we look ahead into 23, it similarly looks like it's continuing that growth trajectory. I think one of the things that has been interesting to see is that return, though, is not uniform. And so, again, for anyone in the session on, I think it was Monday, the changes between some of our SMB kind of customers, so the smaller businesses, that pace of return has been quicker than maybe some of our larger customer organizations. We've certainly seen our meetings and events kind of queries and inquiries in terms of sourcing and that return pick up much more rapidly than some of our overall kind of corporate business travel side of things. Okay. So in aggregate, absolutely, that recovery is there, and let's hope it continues and in fact accelerates. But it has been a different mix than we saw pre-COVID.
Right. Okay, excellent. And then Traci from the Sabre side, I mean, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, we're following, I mean, I don't know about you guys in the audience, but I'm kind of exhausted. I've been back on the road a lot. And I think just the attendance that you see at conferences nowadays and that we're seeing in general, literally this year I've already been around the world one time, and on my way to the second. So, one data point, but I think all of us are the data points that make this up. In terms of what Sabre is seeing overall for recovery, we are kind of on trend with some of the statistics that have been shared more broadly. I think by the end of this year, we'll be at about 90%-ish recovery, kind of net. We saw at the end of last year some of our highest booking since pre-pandemic, and we were back at somewhere between 60 and 85, depending on the region and the area. So definitely seeing a return. We're seeing that in our TMCs, we're seeing that in our agencies, we're seeing that in corporations. Where we do still see a little bit of friction is, I don't believe, if you actually went out and said to your corporate entities, what did you fund, or your CFOs, what did you fund your travel budgets at? What is T&I funded at? They would not say it's funded at 100%, 150%, 90%. They're still funding it low, but yet we're on the road. So as we talk about things with the tech layoffs, put it in perspective, we talk about a lot, makes a lot of headlines,
Sure.
but Amazon laying off 18,000 people when you've got 1.5 million people that work for you, it's nothing, right? It's impactful to those people, but in the scheme of things, it's still pretty small. Yeah. But there's so many things going on right now that when you say, okay, T&I budgets weren't fully funded, there are some layoffs, there's a recession or looming recession depending on where you are, we've got the war in Ukraine, we've got general inflation. What does that mean? That would kind of lead me to, we're on a high, where is it gonna go as we head forward? I think we have to remain resilient. This industry, go back 50 years. Travel has trended at or above GDP levels on a per decade basis for the past 50 years. So we'll be fine. We picked a good industry. It's just going to take a little while.
Yeah, great, thank you. Adrian, I don't know if you have any.
I don't know how to add any more to what was just shared.
I just didn't want to have you feel left out there, kind of sitting there.
No, so last year in 2022, we were about 80%, a little less of 2019 numbers, and it definitely wasn't. When you split it out across verticals, it was not equal in any way, shape, or form. But there was verticals that did better and performed better than other verticals in terms of booking travel. One of the things that I was investigating was, when you go to a conference, SMBs normally would usually send 1 or 2 people. Our enterprise customers would send, 4, 5, 6 people just to get in every session and really get all the knowledge they can before coming back. We didn't see that last year. Enterprise really didn't send 5 employees to the conference. They sent 1 or 2. Yeah. Where the SMBs, they continued to send 1, 2 people. So the growth on that side definitely increased. It didn't necessarily increase, but it rose faster. And then when we look at what's happening this year, especially when it comes to terms with one of our conferences that's coming up, we're actually beating numbers and all our goals, and it's back. It looks like it's going to be back to big time travel across the board.
Excellent.
So I think it's hard to answer, will it come back, as we start to look at what's happening in the economy, as we start to look at the tech layoffs. Is that going to translate into other industries? It's really hard to.
But I think at the end, right, I guess I'm feeling a sense of optimism that, we're kind of in a good place and we're not going to see another, obviously not the same kind of drop we saw in COVID, but kind of going there.
Agreed.
Okay, great, thank you. So how about we'll go next question. So you don't feel left out, I'll let you start with the answers here then. Adrian, so it's around, kind of COVID, right? We saw a lot of changes coming in. Travel managers made some changes, certainly on the hotel suppliers. So Kat, feel free to weigh in here as well. Things around, channel management in terms of, what they did, cleanliness, other things. What were the most successful types of things you saw, or, the impactful? And then, from there, do we see those continuing? Do we see changes coming up? Or is it going to go back to normal in terms of what the travel managers and the hotelier suppliers did?
I think that's a better question for Kat.
Yeah.
But I'm happy to talk about what we're kind of doing. And I know this is a question later on, so I'm not going to go into much detail.
But we can adjust this.
But
if you want to run with it, I'm really fine with it.
No, it's sustainability is huge. Cleanliness was huge. So we had to figure out ways to get that into our tool so that travelers knew what was available to them, because all of a sudden you saw safety as a huge piece of the puzzle, like bigger than it ever has been, and duty of care being massive. You can't send an employee out and then all of a sudden they're stuck and you're like, wait, where are they? Like, we don't know where they are. So we had to make adjustments in order to get that information out there. And then as we look forward, I don't see that us ever returning. Duty of care is huge. Sustainability is huge. Safety, neighborhood scores, huge. There's no returning. But
I think it's interesting. If you look at what travel managers would have said were their priorities prior to COVID, and then during COVID and now post-COVID, the top 5 or 6 are probably the same. right? I don't know that they've necessarily shifted, but maybe the order of those adjusted slightly, right? So safety has always been important to corporations who are sending their employees everywhere, right? Cleanliness has always been important. Duty of care, we know, has been important. I think just COVID sort of maybe amplified some of that a little bit. I think that some of our client organizations are probably looking at how do we hold on to that, right, going forward. So let's not slip back into thinking that certain things are okay. Let's keep the focus on it and keep that momentum rather than maybe going back to sort of the pre-COVID ways.
Yeah, so I guess let's kind of go back to the sustainability question, because I think this is a conversation that came up, I think when we were talking about stuff earlier. And, really I think there was just kind of how each company, each, kind of looked at the sustainability differently. I mean, was there a need for, almost like a standards and ways to make sure that everybody was kind of aligned as to what those were? I don't know if you guys have any.
I had a pretty strong opinion on this.
So yeah,
this is shocking. But I think the reality is, stand back and talk about standards. The reality is there's no such thing as a real standard. Everybody does their own standard, and then it's like, well, I picked this standard, or this version of this standard, or this variation of this standard. And what I think we're seeing, if we level way up on not just sustainability, but in corporate travel overall, you're continuing to see this push towards the consumerization and the digitization of the corporate space. And it is really freaking hard. It is really hard to see that consumerization come in to the corporate space when you've got legacy environments, legacy mid-back office system, legacy ERP, legacy technology. And until we can really start solving this end-to-end, you're not going to be able to really solve the real problem. So yes, we can plug in third parties. There are a variety of companies out there who do really good at geo-services, at neighborhood scoring, at traveler ratings, at sustainability. But what I actually think is going to happen is give this space a couple years, give this space 1 or 2 years. Watch what happens in Google, on Google Maps and in directions, and where you start to get flagged with an eco score. Behind the scenes, what you're going to start seeing those big companies do is collecting the real data that sits behind that. So as an example, what kind of a train is it? How is that train fueled? Is that actually more economical than potentially the type of jet that's flying and the weight that that jet carries? Those are real questions that people aren't asking yet, but that's the devil in the details behind sustainability. You're going to see it manifest in the consumer space. You're going to see a push. It may be a check the box in the corporate space today, but you're going to see a push towards getting better and more opaque about that, kind of proliferating across the tools. It'll manifest in a corporate booking tool, but ultimately it's that really back end, literally what seat is my butt in and how is that powered? That is what we should ultimately care about if you care about sustainability.
I think also this year there's an interesting kind of intersection between that sort of the consumerization and the individual choice and the corporate's role in driving towards a more sustainable planet, a more sustainable travel, right? And I think one of the things, I was talking earlier about different paces of recovery versus 2019. I think that some of the kind of enterprise organizations and potentially some smaller businesses as well have looked at what they were able to do without travel. And there's not just the financial consideration, there's things like the carbon consideration, right? And so I think that some of what we will see this year in terms of that impact on corporate travel is really going to be around companies kind of challenging themselves to say, where is there a more environmentally sustainable choice? And do I need to make that choice at all, right? Do I need to do this? Or is this something that can be done without or with a lower carbon footprint? I'm using carbon as an example because it's probably the most easily comparable, but sort of insert metric here. So I think that will be an interesting one. And I think that's, again, the challenges with standardization and how you choose to assess your sustainability impact as a company, so in the corporate space. That will evolve over time, fully agree with you. But I do think it's those individual choices now as companies, as well as our individual choices as travelers, that are having that kind of impact. And eventually we'll get to a point where standardization more standardization, I guess, makes it an easier kind of comparison to make more informed choices. But I do think it's having an impact just on corporate policies, right, in terms of what they're doing this year. It's not just about what have I funded my T&I budget, but it's also, you know, in some cases, what's my carbon budget for travel, right? And so some companies really are embracing that and taking responsibility for the consequences of their travel choices.
Yeah.
And then just to add a quick point, from an OBT standpoint, so our site is configurable. I'm just going to do this. Super configurable, and so we have over 100,000 configurations in our system, and so a major corporation might have 20 plus configurations, and within each configuration, there's different content that's enabled, and so like. In Europe, there might be, you know, an OTA enabled with a GDS, and in America, there might be something else, and you can get really into each individual country. But with each one of those connections, with each one of those content sources, there's no standardization. So it's not apples to apples, and so what you're seeing in one of the configurations is completely different than the other, and so it's not. We need to figure out a way to really bring it all together and make it cohesive and make it just seamless across the board. And so I think that's going to be a really big project for, as Traci had mentioned, maybe Google.
Yeah. Well, so I mean, obviously, there's a lot of kind of complexities as you guys are mentioning. You know, where we're going to go. I mean, do we see, you know, as you're kind of looking at what's that next technical, you know, hurdle that you're crossing? I mean, are we looking at the fact that we're going to see, you know, AI bots that go out there and plan the trips for everybody, you know, based on personalization information, you know, going through my Google Calendar and knowing what I do? I mean, is that all something? I mean, is there more that, you know, kind of we see from a corporate point of view where, you know, on the one hand, you still want the choice from the consumer, you know, the corporate traveler, but on the other hand, it's got to be within policy and everything else. I mean, do we see, you know, how some of that will flow?
Yeah, I love buzzwords. So ML, machine learning, AI. Yeah, so we're rebuilding from the ground up all of our entire travel ecosystem, and that includes Concur Travel. It's not just a UI refresh, it is ground up rebuild. New architecture, everything like that. It's going to make us really quick and fast and easy to integrate different partners when today it's not that easy. But yeah, we're looking at, and I know that this is another buzz term, the connected trip, and what does that mean? So if I fly to, you know, Seattle every week or every month, do I need to look up each individual, you know, vertical and say, okay, let me find the hotel I'm going to stay in, let me sort through the results, you know, making sure it's all in compliance, whatnot. Let's say I booked that same trip a few times. Do I need to take all those steps? I don't know if we're going to get to a place where it just books it automatically for me, but I think it's going to get to a place where using machine learning and AI, where it's like, okay, well, you know, yeah, I want to take that same trip. It's compliant. It works in policy. Like just a few clicks and I'm done. I don't want to sort through multiple pages of properties.
Sure. Great. Any?
Yeah, I think the interesting piece around some of that personalization, right, of your trip. I think in the retail space, in the leisure space, it's very easy to sort of see how that's focused on one person, right? It's you, it's your trip. In the corporate space, you've obviously got that kind of two-layer, right? So you've got the individual traveler, the employee, and you've got the company and the corporation, what they're trying to accomplish. And so I think that, again, it'll be kind of an evolving technology that sort of says, right, how do we take those two things and achieve both of those objectives, right? Or both of those parties' objectives, I should say. So I think your point around, you know, it's in compliance, and so therefore we'll kind of book it again, is a great start to that. I don't know, I guess, what the future will hold. There's probably a lot more technically savvy people in the room who are like, oh yeah, we know where this is going to go, Kat, just wait and see, right? But I think it's an interesting space when you sort of take that, those two parties and kind of figure out how do you drive towards objectives that work for both. And hopefully they're in alignment, and sometimes they may not be.
And I think there's more than two parties, because you've got the traveler, you've got the corporation, so their travel policy, et cetera. You've got a TMC or agency that may sit behind it, which is playing an increasing role as duty of care and some of these other things play in. And then behind it, you have some gateway of technology, if not one, multiple, because it could be a booking tool that manifests certain things, but that booking tool may be pulling from different supply sources. And then it may be calling a supplier who has certain things that they want to do, but they functionally can't feed through. And by the way, when there's ever an ecosystem with that many hops, there is selfish motivations across that ecosystem. And those motivations are going to impact things. And then it's not just about inspiration. Can I figure out where you're going, what you might want to do, what do I bring to you? Can I do that in a more advanced way, AI, ML, insert said buzzword here. But it's post-trip. What about when I have an issue? What about when my co-chair doesn't follow through? What about when I need to expense it? How do I get this through my bid back office system? And I think there is a lot of naivety in the system around the implications of that, the challenges that we face as an industry of that. So starting brand new from nothing and building something really cool sounds great, but actually making that work at scale globally across all systems, across all ecosystems is incredibly challenging, and you have to find a way to bridge those worlds together. And I think that's what the big players do really well. Do. I'll say that, do.
Yeah.
And they don't necessarily do it well, but they're the only ones who can do it.
Sure.
And that's key one. Let's first get effective, and then over time we'll get more efficient. And technology is just an enabler. It is an enabler to make us do more things better, but it's not the end-all, be-all.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's interesting. Then you could kind of mention how there are, a number of big players, and you've got a step along the way. But there's obviously been a lot of changes in the past, year. I mean, we had Agencia that's, is no longer part of Expedia, and Sabre with Confirma. How does that all play? I mean, do we see more of these? Do we see an impact, and that's going to be? Is it, just going to be companies shuffling the deck? I mean, what do you guys see as part of that?
Well, certainly we bought, Sabre acquired Confirma in the payment space. I think payments, FinOps, et cetera, has been a hot space. Confirma's been a tried and true player in the space for a long time. We're going to continue to see that. We operate it independently today. So within the Sabre portfolio, it is an independent entity. I think if we kind of look at this consolidation, whether it's Agencia into Amex GBT, whether it's Trip Actions and Reed and Mackay, you're seeing some opposites attract in this space. Frankly, there are less changes happening in the space than I would have anticipated after a black swan event. I don't know how many of you guys had to do this, but I know when COVID hit, we had to stand back and say, what's going to happen? Who's going to survive? Who's going to go bankrupt?
Yeah.
How is this going to play out? And we actually predicted in some sectors much more drastic changes and dramatic changes than what we saw. So in some ways it didn't happen, but I think we'll see more of it. It will depend on how economically, not a lot of players in this space can handle very few can handle another black swan event. And only some can handle if the economy doesn't come back. If we truly go into a global recession, if Ukraine evolves and it goes across more borders and impacts things more drastically, you're going to see more consolidation in this space, and I think you're going to see some weeding out of things. But none of us know what will happen there ultimately.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's kind of take the opposite side. Obviously had a lot of players in the mix, but is there an opportunity for a direct connect, right? So certainly I don't know, Kat, if you've heard of any instances where you have corporate customers that are basically saying, hey, can we just talk to you guys directly, build our technology to do that, and kind of avoid some of the pieces in the middle. I know, certainly in the early days with Pegasus as kind of the intermediary switch, and then having OTAs or working directly with the CRS. I mean, do we see anything like that from the hotel side? Have you heard any requests or?
So on the corporate side, I mean, our GDS partners are far and away our most important channel, right? I think if I look back a few years, there were a couple of larger corporations who'd approached us and said, we're thinking about direct connects. I think, again, as many of the people sitting here know better than I, the complexity around that when you've got, I would love for IHG to be sole supplier for, every company around the world. It's just not a practical hope, practical dream, right? So when you start to look at Direct Connect, it's not just a one, right? And so actually then it becomes complicated for the individual organization. And obviously from a supplier perspective, the more of those connections you have to manage, there is a cost-benefit analysis that you kind of look at. So it's not been something that really has, to my knowledge, resurfaced since COVID. I mean, I think, again, there are a couple of companies sort of dipping their toe in the water, exploring it, maybe more on the airline side than hotel. But it's not really been something that's kind of come up recently. I think it's interesting with the kind of the consolidation and the M&A that you were just talking about. I think some of that is going to be interesting to sort of see what does that do from a connectivity perspective. And I think particularly for some of the innovators in the industry, they're sort of looking at it and saying, well, if we're setting up without having to think about an existing infrastructure, what's the way that we want to set up, right? I think from an IHG and from any hotelier perspective, and actually I think Alex from Marriott kind of mentioned this yesterday, for all of us, it's the question around which channels help us to reach our intended markets in an efficient way, right? For us right now, the biggest piece of that remains GDS. That hasn't changed. Okay. And we'll sort of see, how things evolve, over the next few years. But it's not something that's, the people banging on my door saying, now it's post-COVID, we want to connect directly, Yeah.
I'd say from a GDS perspective, and I'll argue, I think a GDS will evolve in terms of what it is in the future. At Sabre, we are on a mission to be that travel platform that can support anything. It doesn't matter what source. Be source agnostic, be multi-source, open that ecosystem up, because ultimately our job is to provide the technology, the content, the management layer, the connectivity, and the things that you may need to add on, AI, ML, et cetera, to that. What I've heard since post-COVID, so pre-COVID, I think rumblings, we should do a Direct Connect, we're gonna build an in-house platform, we're gonna do this. And then you go through and you realize, oh my gosh, this is expensive.
It's hard.
This whole replatforming thing, have fun.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work. And it costs a lot of money, and then it sustains. And then every tech player out there updates their APIs several times a year, if they're good. And so then you've got to maintain that. So just in our lodging space, we're maintaining 300 plus direct connects, plus connections to major OTAs. And you're doing updates at various times with all of them. Sometimes we own, sometimes they own. Then you need to bring that in, and if you're single source, which means you go to IHG just for IHG, it's easier. But if you go to IHG for IHG, and then 15 different aggregators in the space for IHG, you then need to normalize it. You need to rationalize it. You need to know like for like, and then you need to be able to provide that with intelligence. I think Concur has taken a position to say we want to go single source with some of the big players in the new T2 platform that you're building, which in theory is good. It takes a ton of the burden off Concur to have to manage the policy, the management, and all of that. But that puts that burden on someone else in the ecosystem. And I think that is the balance that has to be managed as we go forward. And what we're seeing from the big TMCs and corporations is, I can't manage all this. This is just like a lot. There's a few of them who've leaned in, but like, they're not tech players. That's not what they do.
It's sort of know who you are, know your strengths.
Yeah.
Kind of, it's a big, I think someone described it as a big sort of ugly, hairy thing. And it is a big, ugly, hairy thing when you think about that kind of distribution piece of it, that while on the surface, you might kind of go, this might be interesting to explore. Actually, when you start to look, and you don't have to dig very deep, you suddenly realize how complicated this is going to be.
Yeah. As a big, ugly, hairy thing, it's hard. Like, I think we are that sometimes. And it's really hard. And you get into the depths of it, and then you realize how many positions it gets truncated at, or challenges, or what systems don't do it. But that's also what makes it fun.
Definitely.
Like, that's also what makes
That's
it
why we're here, right?
challenging and fun.
Exactly. Excellent. Well, thank you so much. We've hit time. Really appreciate you guys coming on and sharing your expertise with us and the crowd. So thanks, and thank you everybody for listening.
Thank you.